As soon as the camera dropped, Cindy shook her head in disgust and handed the mic to her young cameraman, Mark. "Richard's a piece of work," Mark said. "You got that right." Cindy walked over to the 4x4 truck. John Masters was sitting in the cab with the door open, looking at a map on his laptop. "Any luck?" "Reaching Chase on the sat phone? No." "Maybe his battery's dead." "Chase makes sure all of our phones are charged. The sat phone is either broken or he's in trouble. He'd have the phone on by now if it worked. The school secretary called and said he'd been put on a bus. Hard to break a phone on a bus." "Maybe they stopped the bus and moved him into a shelter." "He'd still be able to call from a sat phone if it worked." "From what you told me, he knows how to take care of himself." "He does, but I've got to make sure he's okay." John pointed to the map on the computer screen. "You're going up there." John nodded. He had been with Cindy on and off throughout the day. They'd had lunch and dinner together. They'd also been together when Chase called from school that afternoon. "I have some pretty good sources," Cindy said. "There's no way in or out of Palm Breeze, and it's going to stay that way until at least tomorrow, maybe longer." "There's always a way in," John said. "Devil's advocate," Cindy said. "Let's say you manage to get past all the roadblocks. Chase may not be at the farm." "Wherever he is, we'll be closer," John said. "And I'll be where the damage is. There's not much to fix around here." "What do you mean by we'll?" "Tomas and I. We'll take different routes and keep in touch on the sat phones and the CB. We'll get in. We've done it before." He looked at Cindy for a moment, considering. "What?" Cindy asked. "Do you want to come with us?" Cindy smiled and looked at her watch. "I'm off the clock until tomorrow morning. What are the chances of me getting back in time for work?" "I would say the chances are absolutely zero." "Fine, then I'm taking my work with me." She looked over at Mark, who was packing up his camera. Cindy called him over. "What's happening?" "Do you want to head up north to the hurricane of the century with 2 complete strangers, without pay, without telling the station? Oh, and you'll probably get fired if the hurricane doesn't kill you first?" "Sounds good," Mark said. "Let me get my camera." 11:09 p.m. Chase, Nicole, and Rashawn were standing, crouching actually, so they wouldn't get blown off the road, about 30 feet from the largest gator any of them had ever seen. It looked a lot bigger than 13 feet to Chase, and it hadn't moved an inch during their noisy approach. They had yelled, jumped up and down, and even thrown rocks at it. Chase was certain he'd hit the gator at least twice. "You're the lion tamer," Chase said to Nicole. "What do we do?" "I'm not a lion tamer," Nicole said, "and even if I was, there's a big difference between a lion and a gator." "Yeah," Chase said, "about 8 feet of difference." He looked at Rashawn. "What do you think?" "I've seen a lot of gators, but I've never seen one act like this. Maybe he's dead. I'll tell you one thing, it wasn't easy for him to get up that slippery bank. Gators don't move so good uphill, especially ones this size." "Fate," Chase said. "What?" Nicole and Rashawn said at the same time. "Fate," Chase whispered. "I mean, what are the chances of a 13-foot gator hauling out onto this levee during a hurricane and dying lengthways across the road at the very moment that we need to walk past?" "So you're saying you don't think he's dead?" Nicole said. "I'm saying it doesn't make any difference. Dead or alive, we have to get by this prehistoric speed bump, or else we're going to die on this road. One way or the other, we're dead." He took the GPS from around his neck and slipped it over Nicole's head. Before they could say anything, he half-walked, half-crawled toward the behemoth, angling toward its tail, thinking it would be easier to step over the tail than the body or snout. And the tail wouldn't bite him. But gator tails do move, Chase discovered, like armored whips. Just as he was stepping over, the tail came to life, flicking his feet out from under him. The gator's head whipped around and its jaws snapped closed, loudly enough to be heard above the howling wind. Chase dove headfirst over the bank and rolled, stopping just before he hit the water. He heard the gator following him over and began scrambling as fast as he could on his hands and knees along the water. He heard a splash behind him and immediately started crawling up the bank, hoping Rashawn was right about how difficult it was for a large gator to get up a slippery hill. When he reached the road, he lay on his back, gasping. Nicole and Rashawn's worried faces appeared above him. They pulled him to his feet and half-dragged him 50 feet down the road before they could stop and catch their breath. That might have been the stupidest thing I've ever seen a human do with a wild animal, Nicole said. It worked, Chase said, but he knew she was right. He'd have to rank it right up there with leaving the tools in the backyard so his father could get struck by lightning. We thought the gator ate you, Nicole said. He wouldn't have eaten him, Rashawn said matter-of-factly. At least not right away. He would have killed him and buried his body underwater in the mud, then waited for it to rot so he could tear off the soft flesh and gulp it down. Well, that's a relief, Nicole said. She and Chase started laughing. Rashawn smiled. I'm not so sure what you two find so funny about alligator eating habits. Lying across the road playing possum is how that gator hunts. She pointed to the spot where the gator had been parked. There's only one way across this water without swimming. When a deer or some other kind of animal comes along down the road, he just waits and snaps it up when it gets close enough. I bet that's how he got so big and old. And fast, Chase added. I've never seen anything move like that. Speaking of which, Nicole interrupted, we need to get moving. Chase retrieved his GPS from Nicole's neck and turned it back on. A little over a mile and we're off the levee. 2 miles after that, we're at your front gate. 1:15 a.m. Every few hundred feet, the levee was breached. They made it across the first 4 gaps by climbing down in the gap and forming a human chain, linking hands so they weren't swept out into the lake by the water gushing through. The 5th breach was 3 times wider than the others and only 25 feet beyond the last one. We're on an island, Nicole said. A very tiny island, Rashawn confirmed. Chase glanced back at the previous breach just in time to see a large piece of asphalt slough off, and it just got smaller. The chain idea is not going to work here. It's too wide. We have to figure out an alternative. If he ever saw his father again, he was going to suggest several new items for the go bag. Right now, a length of rope would be pretty handy. I think I could jump it, Rashawn said. Chase and Nicole stared at her. She was big and strong, but she didn't look like she could jump a 15-foot gap and land on a jagged piece of asphalt. What are you looking at? Rashawn said. You're not the only athlete here. I'm a good long jumper, the best at my school. I got a case of medals and trophies to prove it. If you made it across, Nicole said, how would that help us? I'll scramble down, anchor myself on the other side, and hold out my free arm. I got a very long reach. We'll build a chain from the other side. Chase can grab my hand, you grab his, and I'll pull you both across. A running start is going to be nearly impossible with this crosswind, Chase pointed out. We have to do something, Rashawn asked. What have we got to lose? You, Nicole said. Chase glanced back again at the breach behind them. Rashawn's right. If we don't do something right now, we'll end up in the lake. Rashawn pulled her poncho off and handed it to Chase. Stuff that into one of your Boy Scout pockets. It'll just get in my way. I'll need to have you stand on both sides of the road, shining both headlamps on my landing spot on the other side. I'll jump right between you. Chase switched his headlamp off and on and took the right side. Nicole took the left, about 15 feet away. Rashawn walked back to the previous breach, checking for anything on the road that might trip her. She took a couple of deep breaths, stared at her landing spot on the other side, then took off. Chase was right about the crosswind. He noticed Rashawn angling to his side, and he hoped it would be enough to compensate for the drift when she was in the air. He and Nicole stared in horror as Rashawn sailed off the edge, then stalled midway across as if she'd smashed into an invisible wall. She seemed to hover for a moment, her arms and legs flailing away as if she were trying to fly. Then she dropped like a stone into the black, rushing water.